Welcome everyone to tonight's council meeting. Before the council meeting starts, we have a public forum, and the public forum is being audio recorded for administrative purposes. By speaking at the public forum, you agree to being recorded. Please ensure that if and when you are speaking at this public forum that you're respectful to other people and use appropriate language. Albury City accepts no liability for any defamatory or offensive remarks or gestures made during the course of the public forum. The public forum is being held in accordance with Code of Meeting Practice, Section 4 of the Code of Meeting Practice for council staff and delegates. It's imperative that the speakers focus on the item that they're speaking for or against. And at the completion of their presentation, there'll be time for councillors to ask questions. Each speaker will have 5 minutes to present their position. So we'll start off firstly with the first speaker, who is Mr. Michael Walsh, and it's item 13.1, 61 Birchgrove Crescent, Thurgoona, and he's speaking for council's preferred recommendation.
Thank you, councillors, for the opportunity to speak here this evening. My name is Michael Walsh, and I'm acting this evening in my capacity as General Manager of Bowenville Developments, the developer of Brooklyn Fields Estate in Thurgoona. I'm speaking here tonight in part to address some of the comments made at the previous council meeting regarding not only this development application, but also Brooklyn Fields in general. I'll start with some general remarks around Brooklyn Fields, if I may. There were several comments made at the last meeting regarding the zoning of Brooklyn Fields, and there seemed to be some confusion as to whether Brooklyn Fields was considered a single occupancy large lot subdivision. In fact, it's not correct, and Brooklyn Fields is zoned as general residential, which is indeed intended to provide a range of lot sizes and dwelling types. This specifically includes dual occupancies and affordable housing. From day one of Brooklyn Fields, dual occupancies have been contemplated and the subdivision designed in a way to accommodate that. The restrictive covenant and design guidelines, which were covered a fair bit in last week before's conversation, specifically identified 4 lots in the first stage, which were predetermined as being suitable for dual occupancy. However, the covenant clearly stated that as developer, we had the discretion to alter this clause. Brooklyn Fields contains a range of lot sizes, not only to ensure compliance with the LEP, but also to provide the market with the lots that they're demanding. There seems to be a misconception that people who are looking to buy land in Thurgoona are all seeking exclusively 1,000 square metres plus, and that's simply not true. Our experience has been that whilst there are plenty of demand for large lots, there is also demand for smaller lots, depending on the buyer's intent and stage of life. Brooklyn Fields is already home to a number of downsizers who are specifically seeking smaller, low maintenance lots. The intent of this covenant clause is to provide the developer with some level of control as to how the estate evolves. As noted in the recommendation from council officers, there are 2 other dual occupancies under construction in Brooklyn Fields. We also consented to that development in the same manner as which we have this particular application, and both were subsequently approved by council. We feel that the approval of a 3rd dual occupancy in 194 lots that have been developed to date would suggest compliance with the zoning of the estate rather than contradicting it. I would also note that for stages subsequent to stage 2, we've amended our covenant so that it no longer specifies particular lots, but provides the developer the ability to provide consent for dual occupancy proposed on any lot. And we feel that provides for a lot more flexibility for potential land purchases. I'd also like to assure councillors that we have complied with all of our DA requirements regarding open space and drainage in the construction of the first 3 stages of Brooklyn Fields, and intend to continue to do so. Noting that we're only partway through the development of Brooklyn Fields, we are currently undertaking or commencing stage 4 of what is expected to be a 15-stage development. In fact, as most of you would be aware, the stage 1 Sloane froglet habitat has been enormously successful, with OEH and DeepEye using our site as a case study for a successful habitat construction. Equally, we have constructed all retention basins required for the first 3 stages of the development. There are 2 more being developed over the next 12 months as development progresses into stage 4. The drainage basins are constructed as the stages, in stages as per the approved plans. And pre-construction of retention basins with no stormwater runoff from roadways is not practical, as it won't provide any downstream improvement. I'd also like to address some of the comments around the purported lack of open space and amenity in Brooklyn Fields. I'd encourage anyone to visit our Stage 1 park and recreation area, which has been enormously popular, with a playground, water play space, barbecues, basketball court, and open grass area, with plenty of space to kick a football. It is heavily utilised by the Brooklyn Fields residents and visitors from elsewhere. In fact, we found during the previous 2 years during COVID lockdowns, but the open space was sought after and used by fitness groups such as CrossFit and others who were seeking an appropriate space for outdoor recreation. This, combined with the several kilometres of walking paths in and around the estate, direct access to tabletop road pathways, and the human hover walking track, I can assure you that neither the residents nor their dogs are left with wanting space to walk. And as noted in the last meeting, we're also about to open our second major play space in Stage 3, which provides for a full-size tennis court, additional open grass area, even more undercover barbecue space, and has a total area in excess of 4,000 square metres. More specifically around this particular development application and our developer approval for the same, the proposed dual occupancy has no commercial relationship with us as a developer, nor with Peterborough Homes, our sister company. As a developer, we do not make any additional money from a dual occupancy lot. The applicant sought approval from Bowenville Developments for this dual occupancy as is required by the covenant, and it has been done on the previous 2 instances. All design guidelines prescribed within the covenant were complied with, and being a corner lot, we felt it was an appropriate proposal, allowing for the 2 occupancies to be side by side rather than front and rear. The proposed design provided good articulation on both street frontages and also provided appropriate car parking. But similarly, being a corner lot, there was in excess of 40 metres of street frontage. So for visitor parking, etc., we didn't feel it provided an issue. We also felt that being opposite open space in the environmental land, we felt there was a limited risk for parking congestion, and given that there was no homes immediately opposite. And we provided approval to the applicant on that basis. So look, that's really all I wanted to comment, just to provide context to the applicant. Not here to lobby heavily for it, but just simply wanted to point out a few facts and answer any questions if there are any. So thank you again for the opportunity.
Councillor Cameron, you have a question?
I actually have 2, through you, Mr. Mayor, if I may.
Yeah.
I thought I heard you mention that there were 4 lots that were initially thought about as being dual occupancy. I presume this proposal is one of them?
No, so none of the 4 that we identified as opportunities were actually turned into dual occupancies. They were all bought by people who wanted to build single dwellings. So potentially looking for larger lots or whatever. So we don't single out our buyers and say you must put a dual occupancy on that block. So the 2 existing dual occupancies under construction weren't on any of those 4 identified.
Okay. And how many in Brooklyn Fields are you able to guesstimate, or perhaps you may know accurately, how many undeveloped lots are there now?
The total development's just under 1,100 homes, and we've currently produced, including Stage 3, around 260.
Okay, so the vast majority are yet undeveloped.
Yeah, correct.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gleichen, question?
Yes, through you to the speaker. And I'm asking this question because you're a representative of the developer.
Yeah.
A couple of weeks ago, we had a presentation here as part of the community forum before the meeting, and the speaker said that they had been told by the salesperson that it was one lot and that nothing else could happen to it, etc.
Sure.
And that it was in the covenant that it had to be one lot. Can you provide some clarification around that?
So look, unfortunately, I can't. It was the previous speaker 2 weeks ago did purchase their land through Peterborough Homes. There's a house and land package. I did have a follow-up conversation with, I can only presume, the person they spoke to, and they were fairly adamant they hadn't made those undertakings. I wasn't there, so I'm not able to provide any certainty around that comment. But certainly, as the covenants are read, yes, there were 4 lots identified, and that wasn't one of them. However, as I said, there is clearly a statement in there that says the developer has the ability to alter that clause.
Okay, and just confirming that if I may, Mr. Mayor, just confirming that that person who spoke last week purchased their property and were given a copy of that covenant that says that.
Yes, yeah, correct. So that covenant's part of the 88B instrument, so it's a required instrument to be provided as part of the land transaction.
All right, thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you. Councillor Vanderman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you to Mr. Walsh. Thanks for your presentation. Obviously, I raised the issue at the last meeting around the fact that the covenant is not an enforceable instrument from council's perspective in approving or refusing a DA. But I just wonder what the point of a covenant is when you have a situation where you can just, if you have 20 people come along tomorrow wanted two lot subdivision in one block, that you're not going to approve that in terms of being able to approve it. And I just wonder what's the point of a covenant if you can just decide at your whim to approve a 2 lot or 2 dwelling subdivision.
Fair question. Look, we have it in there to provide us as developer level of control. We're obviously looking to develop an estate that's sought after and has a good presence in the market. So we wouldn't be looking to approve things that we feel will be detrimental to the overall success of the estate. So it absolutely gives us the ability to do that, I guess. But I don't see a scenario in which we would. And I think given that we're looking at 3 lots thus far that have been approved by us out of the number of lots that have been available to the market, I don't think it's a realistic possibility. But absolutely, I guess that's the nature of the covenant. Does provide us with that discretion.
Yeah, that's the disappointing part from my perspective. It's something that can be changed at the whim of your people or whoever chooses to apply for that sort of a dwelling. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Okay, I think that completes all our questions. Mr. Walsh, thanks for your presentation. The next speaker is Mr. David Hunter, item 13.1, 61 Birch Grove Crescent, Thurgoona, speaking in support of the council's preferred recommendation. Thanks, Mr. Hunter.
Thanks, councillors. Thanks for the opportunity to present this evening. My name is David Hunter, and I'm here tonight on behalf of the applicant, Sasha Smitran, who's asked me to speak to you tonight about the dual occupancy at 61 Birch Grove. Unfortunately, Sasha can't be here tonight, but he is watching. I also understand the application was discussed at the last council meeting, but was not determined. So I'd like to make some brief comments in relation to the development and emphasise some key points for that consideration. Apologies if I go over some of the ground that Michael just went over, but the land is within the R1 general residential, and that's the default residential zoning across all areas of Albury. That zone anticipates and allows for a range of different housing types, and there's 3 objectives in the R1 zone that are relevant to consider. One is to provide for the housing needs of the community, to provide for a variety of housing types and densities, and to encourage a medium density housing that is designed to achieve a high standard of amenity. With these objectives in mind, the zone then sets out what types of development configurations are permissible. And there are a variety of multiple occupancy homes that are permissible with consent, including attached and detached dual occupancies, and including even residential flat buildings. In the revised Part 10, under Subdivision Controls, there's also 2 relevant objectives for consideration. One is to encourage a diversity of lot sizes to suit a range of dwelling types and densities, and the other is to provide lots being designed to accommodate other permissible uses. So clearly in residential subdivision across Albury and within the zoning, there is an expectation and in fact an encouragement that some lots will be used for multi-dwelling. In greenfield areas, typically it's common that they'll be in a dual occupancy configuration, particularly in Albury, where it's able to represent that detached character that's fairly typical across the areas. The DCP then provides the next layer of development control, And they've been updated recently, as you would be aware, to contain very specific design guidance. And this proposal complies with all of the relevant controls for a dual occupancy. And that compliance with the DCP controls is fairly significant because typically, well, not typically, often multi-dwelling housing comes with at least one or two minor non-compliances. So the fact that this one complies is a good outcome. In terms of coverage and density, the site coverage of the total buildings will be just over 50%. I think it's around 51 or 52%. Each of the dwelling complies with the street setback controls, their separation distances, the minimum open space, minimum landscaped areas, and those are all good indicators of the development being proportional for the land and certainly not overdevelopment. The site selection is appropriate, particularly with the lot being on a corner, and it allows that side by side rather than a front and back, which are often less desirable. And it also allows for the development to address reserve areas rather than residential properties on the other side. So in terms of permissibility under the planning controls, the proposal is well supported. It responds to the objectives of the zone and the DCP, and it's also compliant with the various development controls permissible to dual occupancy. Quickly in relation to the issue of the covenant applying to the land. So a dual occupancy is permissible in the R1 zone and the private covenant can't prohibit a use that's permissible under the LEP. The private covenant is effectively a form of separate internal design controls that developers would use to guide their own development outcome, and that's separate to the normal development assessment process. Albury City isn't a party to the agreements, and therefore they have specific wording in the LEP that allows those covenants to be set aside where they would otherwise prohibit a permissible development. It's very typical for developers in New South Wales to use covenants in this form, either through an 88B or design guidelines within private covenants. And for the most part, they're relating to minor design outcomes like facade design, material usage, fencing colours, those sorts of things. But they can also refer to preferred locations for multi-dwelling and other housing types. So as Michael spoke about just before, the purpose of these are to enable a level of control by the developer and to set the character of the estate. And they're not there to act as a separate land use control for what can and can't be developed. Importantly, within those covenants, the person with the power to vary the covenant is the developer. And they also expire after a certain period of time. So in this case, 10 years after they're written, they will expire and they'll have no effect. In this case, the applicant sought and obtained the agreement of the developer, as is the requirement, and then they've complied with the other relevant controls of the design guidelines. The last point I'd like to talk about is it's just worth noting that multiple occupancy housing is a permissible form of housing under the new complying development pathways. This process allows certain multi-dwelling forms which meet the predetermined design controls to be considered under a complying development proposal rather than a local development. From our review, the site qualifies against the land-based requirements of the code SEP, which effectively means that it's a candidate for potential multi-dwelling housing. The dwellings would obviously need to be altered to meet the complying development, but some key differences that we note from the controls would be a greater front setback, but that they could have a reduced area and dimension of private open space and landscaped areas compared to the DCP. So by opting to seek local approval under the DCP rather than follow the complying development pathway, it's likely that we will get a better result from this development. So the applicant therefore supports the recommendation of council and believes they've come up with a good development and they'd be happy with the conditions that council have recommended.
Thanks, Mr. Hunter. Any questions from Mr. Hunter, councillors? No? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so that completes the public forum for this evening, and we can now go into our council meeting for Monday, the 22nd November 2021. We'll start with the opening prayer and acknowledgement to country. Lord, we ask that you guide us in our decision-making, protect us and the community we serve from all that is evil, and strengthen our unity for the welfare of the city. Amen. I'd like to acknowledge the Wiradjuri people as the traditional custodian of the land that we meet upon today, and pay my respects to the elders past, present and future, They hold the memories, culture, tradition, hopes of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that contribute to our community. Thank you. I must be advise you that this council meeting is being webcast and recorded. By speaking at the council meeting, you agree to being recorded and webcast. Please ensure that if and when you are speaking at this council meeting that you are respectful to other people and use appropriate language. Albury City accepts no liability for any defamatory or offensive remarks or gestures made during the course of this council meeting. An audio recording will be made for administrative purposes. Conflict of interest declarations received by the chair. I've received one and it's from myself and it's in relation to item 13.1. It is a non-pecuniary less than significant interest. The reason is I am an acquaintance of one of the proponents to the development. The action is that I will remain in the chamber. Any other late conflicts of interest, councillors? No. Mr. Zacknich.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This advice to the council relates to the disclosure of political donations and requirements under the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act. Section 10.4 requires a person submitting a planning application or submissions regarding a planning application to disclose any reportable political donation and or gifts to any local councillor or employee of the council. Reportable political donations include those of or above $1,000. The disclosure statement forms are available on the council's website or from the customer service centre and must be lodged in accordance with the Act. In dealing with development applications, councillors need to take into account specific planning matters contained in the Act. Accordingly, the provisions of section 4.15 of that Act are set out in the Council Officer's report detailing the planning issues to be considered. The Local Government Act 1993, section 375A requires that a division be called whenever a motion for a planning decision is put at a meeting of the council. Planning decision means a decision made in the exercise of a function of council under the Act, including a decision relating to a development application, an environmental planning instrument, a development control plan, or a development contribution plan under that Act, but not including the making of an order under Division 9.3 of Part 9 of that Act. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Zacknich. There are no apologies. We're all accounted for. Councillor King is on Zoom at this current time. Okay, CM5, the Merrill Minute. I have a Merrill Minute. This is our last meeting for our term of council, which has been extended by a year and 3 months. So I'd just like to start by suggesting the past 3 years have been a challenge for us all. And as a group, we have worked tirelessly to support our community at every juncture. COVID has placed an entirely different dimension on the way we do business as a council. The nature of the current landscape has also created uncertainty and challenged our perceptions of each other. However, all in all, together, we as councillors have held the line. I wish to thank the staff and councillors for their support over the past 9 years and compliment you all on your efforts over the past 2 years. We have been challenged at every turn and still we have put the community first and got on with the job of providing support and services to the ratepayers who are our community shareholders. There have been many lowlights associated with the pandemic, but also as many highlights. The realisation of the $20 million Lavington Sports Ground development, the Murray River Experience development, Wonga Wetlands, Wagira Trail, Lavington CBD development, Wagga Road Stage 2, the Nexus Regional Job Precinct, the Pack Cleanaway development, the Davey Road ramps, and the recent completion of the very popular $3.6 million regional skate park, to name just a few of those projects. These projects alone typify our resilience and vision for Albury and the can-do attitude of you all under difficult conditions. In an environment of COVID restrictions, border closures, accelerating costs, supply chain shortages and staff shortages, the work of council has still been paramount and has been delivered. I sincerely wish to thank all of our staff for being there for each other, the community and their families during this extremely difficult time. You have all held your heads high and made us all proud to be part of Albury City Council. And it has been a pleasure and an honour to be part of your team. On that note, I leave this chamber with no regrets but a heavy heart, as I have thoroughly enjoyed representing you, our community, but most of all, my family in my role as the Mayor. I will treasure the many friends I've made and the memories I take with me. In finishing, I would like to thank my wife and children for their unconditional support over the past 9 years. It has been difficult, challenging, and conflicting at times, but they have always been there for me, and I'm a better person for their support and unconditional love. Thank you all for allowing me to be the best and worst I could be, and I only hope that Albury continues to thrive under the new council now and into the future. Thank you. Action plans. Thanks, Councillor. CM6. If you like, you wish to move it? Councillor Cameron?
Don't need a second.
No.
And you can move it.
I'm happy to move it. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. Okay, action plan 6.1. Thank you, Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move that the following action plans be received and noted. 1, actions complete for noting only. 2, actions awaiting response from external parties. 3, actions in progress. And 4, long-term actions more than 3 months.
Thank you. Councillor Glickin.
Happy to second. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, do you wish to speak to that?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
There are no questions or debate. Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you. Confirmation of minutes of the previous meeting held on Monday, the 8th of November, 2021. Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move that the minutes of the council meeting held on Monday, 8th November 2021 at 6:10 p.m. be confirmed.
Thank you. Councillor Doxey.
Happy to second, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury, do you wish to speak to that at all?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. There appears to be no further question or debate. Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Reports from community forums. There are none. Notices of motion or rescission. There are none. Presentation deputations. There are none. Reports and minutes of committees and working parties. The minutes of the Les O'Brien Athletics Precinct Advisory Committee meeting held on Wednesday, the 10th of November, 2021. Thank you, Councillor Vanderman.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Happy to move the recommendation of the motion. The council receives, notes and accepts the minutes recommendations of the Les O'Brien Athletics Precinct Advisory Committee meeting held on Wednesday, 10 November 2021.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley.
Second the motion, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Vanderman, do you wish to speak to that at all?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Okay, happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Documents for sealing, there are none. Officers' reports for consideration. Development application 10.2021.38305.1, 61 Birchgrove Crescent, Thaguna. Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to move an amended motion, if I could.
Yep. There you go.
Thank you. I move that Council A receives the contents of this report and B refuses to grant consent to development application 10.2021.38305.1 for a dual occupancy development at 61 Birch Grove Crescent, Thaguna for the following reasons. 1, the development is contrary to the provisions of section 415(1)(a)(1) of the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act 1979. As amended in that it does not achieve the aims of the Albury Local Environmental Plan 2010 to give effect to the desired outcomes, principles and actions contained in the Council's adopted strategies, as is not in character with the surrounding development. 2, the development is contrary to the provisions of section 4.15(1)(a)(3) of the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act 1979, as amended in that it does not comply with the provisions of Division E, medium density housing under Albury DCP 2010, Part 10, development in residential zones, Objective B of Division E of Part 10, 2, enable medium density housing and ancillary developments to be compatible with the streetscape and to contribute positively to the character of the locality in which the development is proposed. 3, the development is contrary to the provisions of section 4.15(1)(d) of the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act 1979, as approved of the development would not be compatible with the streetscape and the character of the locality.
Thank you. The mover, thanks. Seconder. Councillor Con.
I'll second that, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Question, Ms. Councillor Starch, be happy to take the question? Councillor Cameron, question?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Could I ask that the motion be scrolled up, please? Thank you. Just there. Through you to the most appropriate member of staff, I'd like to ask, the motion asserts that development is contrary to the provisions of section 4.51A, and I think I, if my eyes are correct, on the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act. For the reasons, I won't read the whole paragraph again. Can I seek a view from our professional staff whether that is true, in their opinion?
Mr. Christie.
Thank you for the question, and for you, Mr. Mayor. I guess obviously our staff position is noted in the public realm as we've recommended approval for the application. So I guess that notes as our staff opinion of the development as submitted.
Yeah, thank you. That's a diplomatic but reasonable answer. Thank you for that. And
Yep.
I'll contribute to the debate in an appropriate way, not through Dorothy Dick's questions. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Touchbury, do you wish to open debate? Thanks.
No, I'll reserve. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Cameron speaking against.
I've been persuaded by the assertions of people tonight who spoke in support of the development. I'm uncomfortable somewhat, as I've been in the past, with the development. But what I have to concede, I think, is that it is in line with our development control and the other appropriate instruments of council. And if people in the estate are unhappy with that development, they have a right to be angry with council, not a right to be angry with the developers who appear to be complying with their legal obligations in this matter. So I think if there's something wrong here, and there may be, then it falls on council and now the next council to critically review what development controls we have in place in Thurgoona and consider if that's the problem. I don't think it's to try and deny what I think are the legal rights to developers to behave within our framework that we set down as a council is something I'm more uncomfortable with than this development. Thank you.
Thank you. Several questions. Councillor Vanderman.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor, through you to the most relevant member of staff. I did raise issues at the last time that this was discussed a fortnight ago around covenants and the ability to change a covenant at whim if it suits the developer. And I just want to ask the question, are we able to, at some stage in the future, entertain a style of covenant which both the developer and council have to take account of when a development application is put in that contravenes that covenant?
Mr. Christie.
Thanks for the question, and for you, Mr. Mayor. So in regards to a covenant that would be upheld, well, the best way that you do that with a covenant would be to do it through the actual development control plan and to actually then make a part of your controls. What would then happen is it will be publicly exhibited. There'll be opportunities for commentary, and it'll go through the normal process. As indicated before in answers, obviously covenants aren't provided any degree of public scrutiny. So they can be put on regardless of what the outcomes are. And as indicated before in previous responses, council can't deny to sign off an 88B instrument where there's a covenant, private covenant we're not a party to. It's also relevant to note that even covenants that council are party to, all covenants have a ability to vary, rescind or go from. That's under the Conveyancing Act legislation. So there is the ability for all covenants to be varied in appropriate circumstances, obviously, as times will go through. Some covenants may be in place for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, and therefore it's no longer appropriate to apply it with modern technology, modern house designs or current community trends or expectations.
Thanks. Very comprehensive answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gluckin, question?
Thank you. On a similar vein to Councillor Vanderman's question, looking into the potential future of being able to deal with covenants, would it be possible for council somehow, whilst Councillor Vanderman has asked, is it possible to encompass covenants into the DCP? Is it possible of council to exclude them for any developments that are might be developed in Albury.
Thank you for the question, and for you, Mr. Mayor, I believe that was pretty similar to my previous answer in regards to the council can't refuse, probably is the best way to decide, to endorse an 88B with covenants, because we're not a party to those covenants, so we're not the ones to enforce those. We do have on our section 10.7 certificates, which you may know more as 149 certificates, which go with all property sales. So there is a component in that, if you're happy for me just to quickly read it, just for everyone's information when they're buying a property, where it says the provision of any covenant, agreement or instrument applying to this land purporting to restrict or prohibit certain development may be inconsistent with the provisions of a regional environmental plan, state environmental planning policy, Albury LEP 2010 or Albury DCP 2010. In these cases, any such covenant, agreement or instrument may be overridden under clause 1.9A of the Environmental Albury Local Environmental Planning Act. So there is information out there clearly for people to advise them that council doesn't uphold covenants that we're not a party to.
Thank you. That's very clear either way. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Speaker against, no speakers for. Councillor Vanderman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I did speak for this particular motion last time, and should this motion be defeated, I foreshadow a different motion, which is the original motion that's in our papers. I am not going to deny this development on the basis of my concerns with covenants. It's quite clear that the council staff have been through the due process and have assessed this application on its merits and have approved this development application. And I'm not going to let my concerns about the disclosure of covenants and the enforceability of covenants, my issues with that particular issue, stop this development from taking place. I just want it noted that I have these concerns around covenants, that there's no obligation on people to disclose or to follow, and it's at the whim of the developer to change covenants or to grant exemptions for covenants should say so desire. And I think that that's an issue that needs to be tightened up, and hopefully the next council will take that issue on board. But I'm not going to be one that's going to block this development on the issues that I have with covenants. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Speaker 4, Councillor Con.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My position on this DA hasn't changed since the previous meeting with the information that's been presented tonight. And I think there's been a lot of discussion about covenants tonight, and I won't rehash the points that have already been made, but I think it's very interesting to note the different ways that presenters spoke about covenants. And to the developer, it was a way of having control over the development and making sure that the development had a strong position in the market or something like that. I don't think I've quoted that exactly. To the people that live next door, the covenant was, they thought, a sense of certainty about the place that they were going to live and raise a family for the next 20 years. So there's obviously a mismatch of expectations. And when you look at the obligations of the developer back to the people that have bought blocks in that estate, they're very little. At the end of the day, the developer builds estates to turn a profit. That's what they do. But we have an obligation back to the people that live in that estate and to the people that are going to live there for the next 20 years and raise a family. And I think that's important.
Thank you. Speaker against, Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I spoke last time in favour of the council's recommendation, and I think it's just been reinforced with me tonight a little more from Mr. Walsh's presentation in particular. We're talking about the third dual occupancy in, I think, 194 lots, if I got that right, and that no variations from our DCP were required to meet our requirements with the dual occupancy. The setbacks, everything met our DCP without anything. Now, you might imagine that a dual occupancy lot might require a few different little moves and changes. It doesn't. It meets our plan. Before the meeting, I went out for the previous meeting. I went and had a long drive around Brooklyn Fields and had a look. And, you know, I've got to say it's probably one of our higher quality developments. I know we've had lots of concerns about developments in Thaguna. I regard this as, it looks good. the open space, and we were told again tonight that the open space for the next stage is already a given. So I think we've got a high quality development, and the person next door bought it on a certain understanding. But a house is being built next door, which will meet our, sorry, 2 houses are being built, which will meet all of our requirements. So if it remained as 1 block, they would have built something there that met our requirements, and the person next door would have nothing to argue about. So I don't support this motion, and as foreshadowed by Councillor Vanderveen, I would vote for the original motion.
Thank you. No further speakers for. Speaker against, Councillor Glacken.
Thank you, and thank you for my being permitted to speak as a further speaker against. I concur with many of the points that Councillor Thurley has raised, and add simply that the lot size meets the requirements, and the community are demanding a variation or a variety of lot sizes. And it's important that those be available in all of our locations around town. So I think this is absolutely a development, dual occupancy that does meet our requirements as council and fits within the parameters completely. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Speaker against, no speakers for. Councillor Doxey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I too was out at Kensington, not Kensington Gullies, you live out there. Out at Brooklyn Fields yesterday, having a look at the estate out there in this particular block. And it's interesting when you look at the submissions that were put in. There is a house being developed both sides of this particular block, but only one person has put in a submission against that. The other person has not put a submission in. And I then take that to be, they don't have a problem with it. The other 2 submissions came from 65 Cardiff Street, and I think that was a married couple in the one house, so it was exactly the same submission from both people, word for word. This council has a reputation for not considering a lot of submissions. This submission is 2 submissions only, and I think there is inaccuracies in what we were told 2 weeks ago. I believe the covenant did not clearly say that there was only going to be a single house next door. I think there is a misunderstanding there quite clearly. And I do not believe that this doesn't meet the standards that we are setting as a council. I am surprised that Councillor Conn has said that she objects to this particular building, this particular development, yet we have got a number of people looking for houses across this city. I'm also understanding that there is about 40 odd blocks to be developed again there or released shortly, and there's 500 people lining up for those blocks. We cannot slow down development because we have a small dislike for it. This development matches and suits that particular site very, very well. The environmental land opposite can't be built on. There will be no houses, and that will decrease the traffic flow. One of the submissions clearly said, misunderstandingly, that there were going to be a single garage. No, that's not a fact. They're both double car garages. So therefore, there's not going to be cars parking all over the footpaths. We have been sold a pup when it comes to some of these submissions. We need to be careful. We need to make sure that we approve housing that meets the standard and provides the housing for the many people that are moving to Albury-Wodonga, Albury in particular in this case, that need decent housing. It was also said that the developer was building the houses. Well, it's not. It's not the developer. It is someone else. All they've done is sold the land. And the person who buys the land, moving within the legal constraints, is entitled to put a property on that house if it meets the standards. So I strongly recommend, and I agree, that if this is defeated, we will then vote for the original motion. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, councillor Doxey. Any speakers for or against? We're really nearly all done, councillor Stutchbury. Just a question, Mr. Christie, in relation to this development. I did ask it at the previous meeting. The cost of this development is $420,000. 3-bed, 2-bed, 3-bedroom units or townhouses. In the current environment, I think it's a little bit light. Has that been assessed and checked properly? Has that been updated in the last 2 years? Right. So, look, I support councillor Stutchbury's amended motion. As I said in the previous meeting, I think two things: the allotments out at Brooklyn Fields, whilst they're making significant allowances for green space, and which was a concern of this council when we approved the subdivisions. The green space they have built, the park and the Slange Froglet area, are absolutely considered to be exemplar of best practice. But I still think, whilst we have a minimum lot size in Albury, does that apply as much as it does in Brooklyn Fields? I don't know. I just get a sense driving around there, whilst the parks look great and the new park looks fantastic, I get the sense of white box rise, and it's not a great development. And I drove up through there yesterday and they can hear each other going to the toilet. And I just understand the concerns of the 3 submissions in this regard, that development's fine, but over development for development's sake and overdevelopment is not what I'd like to see for that precinct. The second part is the covenant, and I don't understand. I know it's a business decision. I understand that, and it can't be proven, but I understand also it's the developer's right to include a covenant. But that's like including a warranty on a car and then saying your car doesn't have the warranty anymore the minute you decide that you unsell it to someone else. And I'm a little bit concerned about voluntary covenants, and I agree with Councillor Vanderman that something, if the new council does anything, they need to try and mitigate that issue for people who are buying these blocks, this allotment particularly. They were told they wouldn't see a dual occupancy next door, and now it's there. So I see all the conditions on the board. I support those conditions, but I just wonder whether or not fairness is being applied here. Councillor Stutchbury, you wish to sum up?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If all DAs, if they ticked all the right boxes on the DCP and the LEP and all of the other acronyms, then you wouldn't need a group of councillors to sit here and discuss them and try and act on behalf of the residents and ratepayers who voted us in. Just because it complies with a DCP doesn't mean that it's good. It just means that it complies with the DCP. We've got White Box Rise in Wodonga. We've got hundreds and thousands of acres of houses in outer Melbourne and outer Sydney, where if you look at an aerial photograph of them, all you can see is roads and roof. You see no grass, no front yard, no backyard. The eaves of the house just about touch. And this is felt to be causing rising temperatures in the cities, just roofs, solid roofs with no green space between them. So, yeah, I'm not going to deny or attempt to deny that this development doesn't meet all of its requirements in the DCP. But I am going to say that I, as a councillor, looking at this development and looking at Brooklyn Fields, I think that it is out of character. Brooklyn Fields, many of the blocks are just above the minimum size. There's not all that many very big blocks there. It's going to be a fairly dense estate once finished. And the more dual occupancies that are in there, the higher the density is going to be. the more stormwater runoff there's going to be, the higher the temperatures on hot days that are only going to get hotter. So I don't like this dual occupancy where it is, how it is, and I will therefore vote against it. Thank you.
Happy to put the amended motion as it sits on the screen. Those for the motion in division, Councillor Stutchby, Councillor Mack, Councillor Con, Councillor King. Those against, Councillor Doxey, Councillor Cameron, Councillor Glucken, Councillor Fairley, Councillor Vandervan. The motion is lost. Councillor Vandervan, did you wish to speak to the original?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll move the recommendation and motion that Council A receives the contents of this report and B grants consent to development application 10.2021.38305.1 for a dual occupancy development at 61 Birch Grove Crescent, Thurgoona, described as lot 225 DP 1262604, subject to the conditions contained in the draft determination included in this report at attachment 5.
Thank you. We'll just wait for that to be replaced on the screen. There we go. Thank you. Councillor Glucken.
Happy to second.
Thank you. Councillor Vandervan, did you wish to speak to it?
I reserve right of reply, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Are there any speakers for or against this motion? Doesn't appear to be. Councillor Vandervan. Oh, hang on. Councillor Cameron, did you wish to speak for?
Only to ask if it's been seconded, Mr. Mayor.
It's been seconded. Councillor Glucken. Councillor Vandervan, did you
No.
wish to close debate?
No, thank you.
Right, happy to put the motion. All those in favour, Councillor Doxey, Councillor Cameron, Councillor Glucken, Councillor Thurley, Councillor Vandervan. Those against, Councillor Stutchby, Councillor Mack, Councillor Con and Councillor King. The motion is carried. Thank you very much. CM 13.2 Albury Environmental Zone Land Review. Thank you, Councillor Con.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I move that Council A endorses the planning proposal and forwards it to the Minister for Planning seeking an amendment to the Albury Local Environmental Plan 2010 and requests that a gateway determination be issued, including the delegation of plan-making powers, so to enable the public exhibition of the planning proposal pursuant to the Environmental Planning Assessment Act 1979. B, endorses the stakeholder engagement plan. C, upon receipt of a gateway determination under section 3.34 of the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act 1979, places the planning proposal and any supporting material on public exhibition pursuant to any requirements of the gateway determination and Schedule 1, clauses 4 and 5 of the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act 1979. And should no objections be received, furnishes a copy of this report and any other relevant information, including the planning proposal, to the New South Wales Department of Planning, Industry and Environment and/or New South Wales Parliamentary Council's Office in accordance with the Environmental Planning Assessment Act 1979, and requests the Minister for Planning or a delegate on their behalf undertakes the appropriate actions to secure the making of the amendment to the Albury Local Environmental Plan 2010.
Finished. Oh, excellent. Councillor Stutchby.
Mr. Mayor.
You got the easy bit. Councillor Con, did you wish to speak to that?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, this is an enormous proposal, and I think it's important firstly to note that what we're agreeing to tonight is to put it out on public exhibition. This is proposing a rezoning of 455 sites across the LGA. Many of them are very small, but some of them are more significant. And of a positive note, there's a net gain of 419 hectares of environmental zoning as a result of the planning proposal. I think really importantly, in endorsing the stakeholder engagement plan, there's a proposal to create an interactive map of all this data, which I see as really critical to the community being able to understand what's in this proposal and understand which lots are near them or places they care about in the community, so that they can give us the feedback that we really need on this proposal. There is a clause in here saying that we'll pass it on if no feedback is received, but I'm sure that we will receive feedback on the rezoning of 455 lots. There is one lot of note that was in Thurgoona that was noted by the staff and consultants as having significant environmental value, but that according to the previous Thurgoona-Willinga precinct structure plan, is planned for commercial development, and there's a recommendation there that that be reconsidered as part of the review of the Thurgoona-Willinga precinct structure plan. I think that's important to keep an eye on, and I'm sure members of the public who are interested will find other lots to give us feedback on as well. So very strongly endorse putting this out on public consultation. Don't necessarily endorse the actions proposed for all 455 lots at this stage, but I'm sure the new council will look forward to considering this with the feedback.
Thank you. Question from Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to the relevant member of staff. It's a very big report, and I was looking at on my council iPad, and to be honest, most of the report, probably 600 of the 692 pages, are photographs and maps, overhead photographs, and I couldn't really see much detail on them. So I just have a question, which is, there's obviously a number of hectares of land recommending to be rezoned in this report, and my question is, in this report, and I couldn't read it, otherwise I wouldn't be asking the question. In this report, is there any privately owned land which is presently zoned either residential or rural going to be rezoned as environmental? That's the first part of my question. And the second part of my question is, if the answer to that is yes, how and when are we to notify the owners of that land?
Mr. Christie.
Thank you for the question and for you, Mr. Mayor. So yes, there are some parcels. There are over 540 parcels that were investigated, and as Councillor Cond indicated, 450 odd that are proposed to have a level of change. Some of those are owned by private parties, whether they are individuals or they may be companies or the like, but they're not owned by either council or the state government. Obviously, the important thing about this planning proposal, it's a proposal. So as Councillor Cond indicated, it's to seek permission to go to the state government to then go out and consult widely with the community, also consult widely with government agencies and other stakeholders. So the idea is that all landholders who are affected will get individual notices. There will also, as indicated by Councillor Cond, be an interactive map that anyone can look at, but also with those landholders, individual notice will be the map that's relevant to the changes for that letter. So they won't have to go for all 500 to see. They'll be able to see a letter just with what's proposed to be changed on theirs. Obviously, as an individual landowner or as any member of our community can do, they can write in and either support, request amendments, changes, or totally object to what's proposed and bring forward their reasons accordingly, and that would be considered by staff before anything came through to council as any changes to then go and seek them to be permanently made.
Happy? Yep. Okay. There's appears to be no one else wishing to speak to it. Happy to put that motion in the form of a division. All those in favour? Councillor Stutchbury, Councillor Doxey, Councillor Mack, Councillor Cond, Councillor Glacken, Councillor Thurley, Councillor Vanderman, Councillor King. Those against? Councillor Cameron. The motion is carried. Thank you. Okay, we're up to draft 13.3, draft Sarvis Park Master Plan. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move that council receives and endorses the draft Sarvis Park Master Plan. B, places the draft Sarvis Park Master Plan on public exhibition for a minimum of 28 days. And C, if no submissions are received through the public exhibition process, then the Sarvis Park Master Plan be adopted as the final version.
Thank you. Councillor Glacken.
Happy to second. Thank you.
Thank you. Just have a question. Councillor Thurley, happy for me to take it? Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to the relevant member of staff. So we've received an awful lot of master plans in the last 5 years and 3 months, and here's another one on our last meeting of the current council. One of the things I noticed in this master plan was that this park was to have a full perimeter fence erected, and it's just not entirely clear to me why that is necessary. I understand that this sporting ground is not used for ticketed sporting events that I'm aware of. I could be wrong. Could I be appraised as to why a full height perimeter fence has been recommended as part of this master plan?
Yeah, Mr. Costello.
Thanks very much for the question through you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, my understanding is that it was mainly from a safety perspective was one of the driving factors from there's a large number of juniors that use the playing fields and with balls heading out onto the perimeter roads and the like. It was deemed a necessary feature to improve the safety elements associated with for the juniors.
Okay.
So it's a ball-proof fence.
That's correct.
I seriously doubt that.
Okay. Councillor Cameron speaking for, or Councillor Thurley hasn't opened yet. Councillor Thurley just opened.
Mayor. I can probably answer Councillor Stutchbury's question just as well, because I went to a couple of games out there some time ago, and it was actually the people who involved with rugby and so on who requested that this fence be erected. It's not to stop the ball, it's to stop the kids running straight out across the road. So it's a heavily used facility surrounded on almost every side by housing. It's right in the centre of North Albury. It's a great little facility and very well used, and it's great to see this master plan.
Thank you. Councillor Con, question before I take Councillor Cameron? No, you're withdrawn. Councillor Cameron speaking for.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can I say I strongly support this, and I particularly strongly support the fence. It's not a matter for levity. I myself was asked to and was proud to lobby for the fence for this facility. It came after a child was picked up or approached by a lady, which may or may not have been quite innocent, but it is a very significant issue to parents of small children particularly, but in particular those in the junior rugby league community in Albury many years ago, but still very much in the memory of many people in Albury. A young boy was murdered from Albury by a pedophile in Griffith. And it is a very serious matter, and the purpose of the fence is to provide additional security for children and juniors playing rugby league. Thank you.
Thank you. Speaker 4, Councillor Con.
Only briefly, Mr. Mayor, to contribute to the discussion about the perimeter fence. I was really pleased to see in reading the report from staff that the intention is to leave that fence open on non-game days, because I'm sure the residents of the local area would enjoy walking or recreation on the oval. So I'm happy to support the improved safety that's provided by the fence, given that it will be left open on non-game days for the local residents.
Thank you. Just a question, Mr. Costello, could you, or any of the staff, remind me where the Greenfield Park development is at in terms of the budget funding in the next 4 years? I see this one's in the next 4 years for $1 million, given its connection with Albury Thunder and its junior sport and a whole range of other usages. Just wondering where that sits in terms of the pavilion development. Do you know?
Thanks very much for the question through you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, there's certainly funding allocated in the next 2 years for the Greenfield Park redevelopment, for the redevelopment of the amenities, and also for stage 1 of there's some terracing and fencing also associated with Greenfield. So there is money is part of the 4-year program allocated for Greenfield Park.
Yeah, I understand currently people with disabilities don't have access to toilets down there, which is a bit of a concern given the age of the venue and certainly the expectation for all abilities and certainly female sport as well. There are no facilities for ladies to get changed down there to play sport. So
yeah, and through you, Mr. Mayor, and to the point about the accessibility issue, I understand that our building team have addressed that issue, and there's a ramp to be installed into that facility, if not already, to ensure that it's accessible for wheelchair persons.
Okay, thank you. Okay, any further speakers for or against or questions? No. Councillor Thurley, just to close.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you. 13.4, expression of interest, options for biosolids transportation and reuse. Thank you, Councillor Buchan.
Thank you. Through you to move the recommendation as a motion that council endorses Topsoil Organics Proprietary Limited and Carbon Make Victoria Proprietary Limited to be shortlisted to take part in the select tender process for the options for biosolids transportation and reuse project. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Vanderman.
Very happy to second this, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor, I have a question from Councillor Thurley. Happy to take it. Councillor Thurley.
Just a couple of questions. Clearly, the issue of PFAS has derailed this initiative on a couple of occasions. I'll go back to the newsprint mill used to spread their waste on farmland, and there were concerns on one occasion with boron levels. And the EPA said that boron's toxic and therefore you can't do this and can't do that. We put the proposal to them, I was involved at the time, that at certain levels it's toxic, but at other levels it's not. And so if you spread it 1 tonne per hectare, it's fine. If it's 50 tonnes per hectare, it's not. Has the EPA come up with any guidelines with regard to spreading biosolids contaminated with PFAS?
Thank you, Greg. Mr. Wallach.
Thank you for the question, and through you, Mr. Mayor. The EPA has not as yet come up with specific target guidelines for the concentration of PFAS in the receiving soils. They do, well, all of Australia works under the National Environmental Management Plan, or the NEMP, in order to risk assess the receiving environment. In a lot of cases, biosolids containing PFAS may be spread. It is the application rate which dictates how much may be allowed to be spread on any piece of land.
I just have one further technical question. I note in the report that we're talking about 12 to 15% solids. I think I've asked this question probably quite some time ago. Have we looked at the equipment at the wastewater treatment plant to see if we can use equipment to increase that solid? Because it means we're transporting quite a lot of water at this stage.
Mr. Wallach.
Yeah, through you, thank you for the question. Yes, the moisture content is higher than we would otherwise like. Certainly when we do the WaterView 2 upgrade, we're looking at much more effective means of removing the moisture from the biosolids than our current belt press.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Glacken, do you wish to open debate?
Thank you. This is a project that council has had on its books for some considerable period of time. And Councillor Thurley is correct. It's had a number of attempts to bring this to this stage. And it's good to see that there are a couple of providers who are able to meet the requirements, have been shortlisted or can be shortlisted should we agree to this tonight, so that we can move this forward. It's an important project for council and our community because it will divert this product from what at the moment is landfill and hopefully be able to ensure that it becomes a positive product. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Speaking for Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Whilst I support this and will vote for it, ultimately this is a somewhat disappointing outcome in that a few years ago it looked as though we were going to be able to process the biosolids on site at our treatment works plant and then have it distributed for use on local farms. And now we're back to square one. Obviously, it's better to put the stuff in a truck and transport it to somewhere for processing than it is to stick it in the landfill. However, one of the things that disappoints me is that of the 2 expressions of interest we've had, one is, say, an hour and a half away by truck, and the other one is perhaps 4 or 5 hours away by truck, and you've got to drive past one to get to the other. And yet the one that's 3 times as far away has got the more points in the qualitative assessment. So I guess I'm a little worried that when we come back with actual tenders, we're going to end up possibly transporting this stuff, which is seemingly 85% water as well. So God knows how much diesel we're burning to transport tons and tons of water to wherever it's got to go for supposedly good environmental reasons. I would just hope that in the next iteration of this council that the councillors might see fit to vote for the closer of the 2 companies expressing interest in this project. Thank you.
Thank you. Speaker 4, Councillor Vanderman.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, just with your forbearance, can I ask a question first?
Yep.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the most relevant member of staff. In your answer to Councillor Sturley's question, the amount of biosolids being 85% water in the Waterview 2 upgrade, you're suggesting that we'll be able to reduce that water content significantly. Do you know whether the contract is going to be based on the current quantity, given that it's 12 to 50% solids, or is the contract going to be based on another quantum measurement rather than what we currently are able to give them? Does that make sense?
Mr. Wallo.
Thank you for the question, and through you, Mr. Mayor. The contract, as we expect to go out, will be for 3 years. It's still expected that the design and construction envelope for Waterview 2 will be longer than that. So this contract will have run to completion by that point. Whether we renegotiate another contract as we lead up to the completion of Waterview 2 is unforeseen at this point. However, in order just to circle back, we would have hoped that with the Waterview 2 upgrade, we would get 60 to 70% reduction in the moisture content.
Okay, so that would, just to follow up, Mr. Mayor?
Yeah.
So that would mean that we would be transporting 2/3 less away than we currently are.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for the question. By volume or weight, yes. The concentration of Pfas, for instance, they would remain the same if for all intents and purposes. It's purely a reduction in the amount of moisture or water in the biosolids.
Okay, thank you.
So speak for.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to continue, we've dealt with this on a number of occasions, and the only option we've come to have to accept is the fact that we bury this in our own landfill. And in terms of eventually reducing the amount of this biosolids that's going to our landfill, it's a good project, and one that this council has supported all the way, understanding that the issues around PFAS were the issues that were preventing us from taking this step prior to now. So hopefully when we get a proper submission from these people, that we can move forward to continue to improve our performance at the Waste Management Centre by continue the Better Than Hard Waste program. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Question from Councillor Stutchbury.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, this question is to the relevant member of staff, and my question is: we spent a fair bit of time in this debate talking about PFAS. Could we be informed as to what human diseases PFAS are known to cause?
Mr. Wallo, do you cross that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for the question. I'd have to defer an answer to that to the experts in the field, which I am not. If you would like me to circle back and take that on notice, I'd be more than happy to.
No, there's no need. I'm not an expert in the field either, but PFAS causes no known human diseases.
Well, I've been looking on Dr. Google, and I've got a few things that can cause problems with your liver, your thyroid, and decreased fertility, high cholesterol, obesity, hormone suppression, and cancer.
I don't wish to be argumentative, Mr. Mayor, but those are all things which are associated with PFAS, not caused by PFAS. You know,
I'm just saying what Dr. Google told me. Okay, thank you. Councillor Glacken, do you wish to close debate?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm encouraged by the sentiment around the room tonight by the speakers and the questions asked. Clearly, this is something that council has been working towards for some period of time. It's unfortunate the hurdles have been there over a significant period of time, and that it's taken such a long time to be able to bring to this stage. There is still yet some way to go, but it'd be great to have this resolved. Thank you.
Thank you. Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you. So to CN 13.5 draft RBC 2021 financial statements. Councillor Vanderman.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Move the motion, recommendation of the motion of Council A receives and notes Albury City's draft general purpose and special purpose financial statements for the year ended 30 June 2021, and B, authorises the Mayor, Deputy Mayor, Chief Executive Officer and Albury City's responsible accounting officer to sign the statement by councillors and management in accordance with section 413 (2) (c) of the Local Government Act 1993 and the Local Government Code of Accounting Practice and Financial Reporting prior to the submission of Albury City's financial statements for audit.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley.
Second the motion, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Vanderman, did you wish to speak to that?
Look, this is a statutory requirement every year for us to approve the accounts, and obviously the accounts are there in detail for people to have a look at. I think it shows that during the COVID situation and all of the things that have happened over the last couple of years, that council is still in pretty good financial shape.
Thank you. Mr Finlayson, just a question in relation, and I previously put you on notice in relation to the water fund. I noticed there's a significant decrease. Can you give us some understanding of what has caused that? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor, and thanks for the opportunity to do some further research in preparation. So it is a couple of factors. One, there are some factors similar to the general fund in terms of the cost to renew assets, in terms of depreciation expense increasing. Also with interest rates available due to the economy and the like, interest revenue is dropping, but also significantly there was lower water consumption during the prior financial year compared to the year prior to that. So that with those three things, they probably tell the story in terms of 1 year compared to the next.
Question, Councillor Gluck, and then I'll speak a four.
Sorry, I don't want wish. My mistake.
No?
I don't wish to ask.
You happy? Speaker four, Councillor Cameron.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I think I only wish to remark that it's remarkable in a sense overall our global financial picture in that we haven't been in deficit in well before the last two terms of council. And of course, that's come about because of depreciation and the effects of COVID. The staff have done a very good job. We've managed to keep rates at all times below CPI in our increases each year, but still build very significant facilities and do a fair amount of maintenance. I think that's a good thing, and I'm proud of my 1/9 part in that process. It bears remembering, though, that there are people running for council who are making outrageous promises and commitments. Everything from the suggestion that Albury could self-perform a $50 million indoor aquatic centre to harebrained ideas from extremists that we should deconstruct Albury's flood mitigation works that have been built up over many generations at many millions of dollars cost and turn them back into creeks and rivers. Anyone that would think that's a good idea never grew up in Albury in the 70s, that's for sure. But that's the financial records.
Thank you. Councillor Vanderman, did you wish to close debate? There appears to be no more speakers.
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. 13.6 September quarter budget review. Thank you, councillors. Councillor King, I haven't heard from you tonight. Did you want to move that? No, you're okay. Can't hear it. All right, Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that Council A receives and adopts the revised budget estimates for the 2021-22 financial year. B, authorises the Chief Executive Officer to make application to New South Wales Treasury Corporation with the budget loan funding of up to $18.7 million. And C, further assess the required amount of loan funding to be drawn down by 30 June 2022 as part of the March quarter budget review.
Thank you. Councillor Doxey.
Happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Question from Councillor Glacken.
Thank you. Through you to the most relevant member of staff. The T Corp rate at the moment, I was looking for it in the report last night and couldn't find it. Can you advise what that is?
Mr Finlayson.
Through you, Mr Mayor, my apologies, Councillor Glacken. I'm actually not up with what the current rate is, but happy to share that. It has been low, but in recent times, steadily increasing with improved futures ahead.
Okay, so they're not paying us to take their money at the moment?
No.
Okay, right, thank you.
Wish they would.
Yeah.
Councillor Thurley, did you wish to speak to that?
Not particularly, Mr Mayor, thank you.
Appears to be no question or debate. Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. 13.7 CCTV Code of Practice and Standard Operating Procedure Review. Councillor Con.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that Council A receives and notes the report. B, adopts the draft Albury City Public CCTV System Code of Practice and Standard Operating Procedure with the exception of current code objective to decrease the Albury LGA's rate of criminal behaviour for assault, non-domestic violence, steal from retail, malicious damage and resist or hinder offender, which is to be retained. And C, updates the Public Police and Procedure Register with the finalised document.
Just wait for that to appear on the screen. Thank you. There you go. Okay, thank you. Councillor Stutchbury.
Second, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Con, do you wish to open debate?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. There is a slight amendment to part B from the agenda. Part A and part C are as per the recommendation. And the amendment that I've moved is consistent with one that I moved about a year ago, the last time that CCTV performance was reported back to us. And this council agreed to keep that objective in the objectives of the CCTV. And I'm moving exactly the same thing tonight. So it would be consistent with the existing position of this council to retain that. Decreasing the rate of crime in Albury was the primary objective of the CCTV project when it was initiated, which was before my time on council. Millions of dollars have been spent on CCTV and millions are soon to be spent extending it to Lavington. And I think it's really important that future councils are reported back the effectiveness of the CCTV based on what its primary objective actually was. We've been told that the CCTV has anecdotally improved the capacity of police to identify offenders. And we know through community satisfaction surveys that CCTV improves the public perception of safety. But I will leave it to anyone listening to interpret what it means that this has been suggested to be removed from the objectives for a second time. It's really important that we remember why we have it and what it was intended for. It was intended to reduce crime, and with millions already being spent on it and millions more about to be spent on the extension, it's important to make sure that it actually does meet that objective. Otherwise, we should be spending that money on other things that do improve public safety. And something that's been raised with me on a regular basis is public safety at parks and on our shared paths and walking paths, particularly in winter, that those areas aren't well lit enough. And that lots of people, particularly women, for example, will jog around ovals early in the morning or after work when it's dark. So in conclusion, I'm moving that we accept all of the recommendations from the staff with the exception that we keep the original intention of the CCTV the same as it has been.
Thank you. Speaker against, Councillor Cameron.
I'd like to move an amendment, Mr Mayor. And my amendment is that council receives and notes the report and eliminates B and C, so that the motion that I'm proposing, the amendment that I'm proposing, I beg your pardon, is that we receive and note the report. I don't believe there's anything wrong with the, should I get a seconder maybe?
Yeah, we should get a
traditional.
seconder. Anyone wishing to second? Councillor Doxey. Did you wish to
Second, Mr.
second?
Mayor.
Thank you. There you can go.
Thank you for that. Look, in the term before the last of council, before we were graced with the presence of some of our current councillors, I had to fight relatively hard with the support of some other councillors, particularly Councillor Doxey, I might add, to get CCTV implemented at all in Dean Street. There was initially resistance to it from some councillors. And although ultimately those councillors supported the measures, and I commend them on having the intelligence and the open mind attitude where they could see that the circumstances had changed in terms of the funding and moved on from their initial resistance. What we've seen in the last term of council, in this term of council, has been dogged resistance from the Greens in the person of Councillor Amanda Con. Now, that is her prerogative, of course, to oppose this measure, but she does it in every way and any way that she can, as is to be expected for someone who advocates against such things. I don't know and I don't understand why the Greens are opposed to it. Perhaps it's some philosophical position or it's some cultural dislike of law enforcement. I really don't know. But what I do know is that CCTV has been successful and is very strongly supported by the majority of people in this city. And it will, I'm sure that it will be very strongly supported by people in Lavington as it's extended. And as announced recently, I hope, if I am returned to council, to advocate for it being extended to other areas of the city. And perhaps one day, 2 walking tracks and parks, because it's a good thing. And there is nothing wrong with the policy position that council has adopted currently. I think it is highly irregular during this caretaker period for staff to be proposing what, by the concession of the report itself, are very significant changes to the policy position. And I'm not happy about it. And it should have been left to the next council to determine this very important and seismic shift. I'm unimpressed by the word games that the Deputy Mayor is playing with her motion. And we should keep this very simple by way of the motion, by way of the amendment that I'm proposing. We're on a good thing here. It's a sound piece of policy. It's been a very good and adequate policy position that has been articulated to date, and we should maintain it as it is. I commend the proposed amendment to you.
Thank you. Speaker against, Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Speaking against the amendment.
Speaking against the amendment. I am a supporter of CCTV. I think it does have a role to play. And one of those roles, I believe, is to either to reduce crime or to improve detection of criminals. And all that Councillor Con's amendment to the original motion was doing was asking for that to be reported back to us. I don't think that there was any seismic change to the what we were talking about. That's my view of it anyway.
Thank you. Any other speakers for or against the amendment? No? Councillor Cameron, did you wish to close debate on your amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Happy to put the amendment. All those in favour of the amendment? All those against? The amendment is lost. We'll now deal with the original motion that was put. Okay, so Councillor Glacken, you wish to speak for the motion? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's been raised that some councillors were not supportive of CCTV and the introduction of here in Albury. One of the main or the significant change was when the police worked in conjunction with council. When the police were going to work with council to use the footage and also the live feed, then that was the change. Clearly, the safety of our community was the reason why CCTV was first installed, and which is why the council ultimately did support it. That was the significant change. And so I need to support this motion because it highlights that fact. It is the reality of why we have CCTV in Albury.
Thank you. Question from Councillor Cameron.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Question through you to the mover of the motion. Councillor Con, why do you oppose CCTV?
Councillor Con, I don't think she opposes it.
On the point of, if you're finished with Councillor Phil. On the point of order, there is no point of order, Mr. Mayor. It is quite within the meeting code of practice. Councillors to ask questions of other councillors or stuff.
That's right. Councillor Con, did you wish to answer that?
Yeah, sure. I haven't said that I oppose CCTV in the debate tonight. We're debating a pretty administrative motion about a review of the code of practice and standard operating procedure from the staff. And if anything, the amendment that I've made is keeping more as it was and reducing the size of the change. But I'm happy to reiterate my position. I know it's election time, but there's no grandstanding from me tonight. I'm not up for re-election. My issue with CCTV is that it's not a good use of public money when it has not been shown to reduce or prevent crime.
Thank you. Okay. Any further speakers for or against? No? Okay. I just want to sort of touch on this last before we close debate. The issue or the change to this particular motion, its formative stage, is to provide accountability to the purpose of CCTV cameras or public cameras. We recently, through a motion, I think Councillor King, trailers with CCTV cameras on that we can use for hoon driving or public events or whatever else. One of those is going to be commissioned in the next week or so. They've been used in other areas across the country and have been used quite effectively in significant crowd control issues. But this more particular is about making the policy accountable to the purpose. And I read the category, I've got the paragraph here in front of me about why it was suggested we should change it to provide the New South Wales Police with recorded material to be used as evidence. Well, that's not the only purpose. And look, recently there was a significant assault in Dean Street where the police are using evidence from probably our cameras to provide a prosecution or successful prosecution against the people who were responsible for that assault on the police. But more importantly, I know, and it was mentioned by Councillor Con, that anecdotally, the police have stated that it has been very useful for them in doing what they do well, and that is protect our community. So I just don't see why there's such angst about just making sure the purpose of the cameras is to decrease Albury LGA's rate of criminal behaviour, so on and so forth. Councillor Con, did you wish to close debate?
Yeah, I will. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, I know certain people would be delighted to get a second Board and Mail headline about CCTV in a week, but we're voting on some fairly minor changes to the Code of Practice and Standard Operating Procedure. I've made an amendment to keep the primary purpose of the system as stated the same, and I think that's important for future councils that I won't be a part of to remember and to consider. That's all.
Thank you. Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Those against, the motion is carried. Thank you. 13.8 additional crisis, social and public housing in Albury. Councillor Stutchbury, this was your original motion, I believe.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And you'll be surprised to hear that I'm just wanting to move a slightly amended motion to what's been presented.
Why not?
Why not?
It's your democratic right.
You tell me why not in the debate. Thank you, Councillor Cameron. I move that Council A receives and notes the report. B endorses the full range of existing initiatives and potential new options for council intervention in the provision of affordable housing for further consideration as part of the scope of the Albury Local Housing Strategy Project. And C, this is my amendment, my addition, further investigates the direct creation of affordable rental housing by partnering with a registered community housing provider, a CHP. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley.
I second the motion, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Away you go, Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you to the staff for preparing this report so promptly. It was not all that long ago that I put this up. It's a good report. It contains a lot of good stuff, but part of the problem we have with a lack of social housing and crisis housing is that we actually don't have it. We talk about it and we talk about strategies and we talk about, doing this and doing that. And so does the state government. In fact, I've read the last two state government reports on crisis housing and social housing, and they talk about just about everything except building the actual structures that these people can rent cheaply and affordably or live in as part of a crisis situation. No one wants to build them. They just want to talk about strategies. So my addition to this report is to actually request of council staff to in fact engage directly with the registered community housing provider of their choice, and then for the future council to then determine if it's a good idea for us to provide the unfortunate members of our community who either can't afford or can't find housing, either short, medium or long term. Thank you.
Speaker against, Councillor Cameron.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I don't speak against this lightly because I'm passionate about low cost housing. I grew up in commission housing, and it is a human right it's essential to people's dignity that they have housing. And it is something that government should provide, but it is not something that local government could or should provide. So many people, when they become involved with local government, think up all sorts of creative ideas, and some of them are very impressive. Even recently, we've seen suggestions that there should be a light rail between Albury and Wodonga. The purpose of local government fundamentally is to provide rates, roads, local services and amenities as they are affordable to its rate base. To suggest or even have a prehensile plan like this, that council should move into the area of provision of low-cost housing, as is done in the United Kingdom, for example, and in parts of Ireland that people think are the northern part of the United Kingdom, that is the role of a council, is greatly misunderstood the tiers of government and the systems of government. In England, of course, in the United Kingdom, there is no state equivalent government. There is only local government and federal. And in Australia, of course, and in New South Wales, our system is very different. The responsibility for providing what is a very, very direly needed thing in our community and in the state generally, more affordable housing, is the responsibility of the state Liberal government, of Justin Clancy and whoever the current Premier is. I can't even keep up with them. It is their responsibility to provide this. Now, why is this so important? It is so important for councillors, whether they're existing or aspiring, to understand this, because there has been a tremendous amount of cost shifting onto local government, a tremendous amount of cost shifting in a whole range of areas by the state government to local government. And it was not that long ago where we were threatened that if we didn't put up prices for water in Albury, that we'd have the scheme taken off us. And we'd be compelled, and we were at that time compelled. And the rate of increases that were being insisted on were just astronomical. There is no doubt, and there should be no debate, that public and affordable housing is essential and is a human right, and it should be provided, but not by the ratepayers of Albury, who have to bear the cost of so many other things. And that's before wacky candidates get going on indoor aquatic centres or deconstructing Albury's flood mitigation scheme to make it look pretty. We are in deficit and we're tapped out financially. We need to be fiscally conservative and not sowing expectations that we can fulfil the responsibilities of the state government or indeed the federal government. I mean, what next? Should Albury Council establish a police force? Should Albury Council start maintaining the Hume Highway and doing other work that, you know, is sorely needed to be done by other tiers of government? This is not an area that councillors should be going into. It is an area that is sorely needed, and it's a very important area. And I commend John Stutchbury, Councillor Stutchbury, for his interest in this area and his compassion. And he is fundamentally a very decent person. Once you get to know him, you'd realise that. And it is typical of his good nature that he has compassion for those who are disaffected in our community, like the homeless people and others who are suffering in this area. But this is not a place council should go, councillors. Thank you.
Thank you. Speaker 4, Councillor Con.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. We really didn't need the patronising speech about how levels of government work after 5 years and 3 months at council.
There was nothing patronising about my speech. It was heartfelt, accurate, and if I do say so myself, quite elucidating. And it is a breach of the code of practice. I shouldn't have to remind Councillor Con about the meeting code of practice and the councillor code of conduct generally, and when it comes to bullying people. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Con, just rephrase and move on.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And I feel patronised on 2 counts now. Thank you, Councillor Cameron. We all know that this is a crisis and it's getting worse because of COVID. It's all well and good for property prices to be skyrocketing around Albury and Wodonga for people who already own their homes. But this is an absolute travesty for people that don't own a home yet or people that are renting. In my work at Community Health, I'm hearing story after story of people being evicted because the landlord is selling to China profit. And I know people who've been on public housing wait lists for up to 3 years. And I can't do anything for them about their health as a GP when they have not got housing. I thank Councillor Stutchbury for putting this on the agenda, and I thank the staff for taking on board our request for some innovation in this space. And I note that the report included examples of local councils in New South Wales operating under the same structures that we do, that have entered into partnerships with community housing providers to provide affordable housing. And if I recall correctly, one of those was Central Coast Council. So it's clear that we could do this. And I think that a future council should absolutely be given the information they need to make a choice about whether they will do it. I absolutely think that they should. I think that in a community where we've got an out of control increase in homelessness, that we really should be considering every option that might be available to us, and not shirking that responsibility to other people. So I commend Councillor Stutchbury for putting the issue on the agenda to start with, and I commend his amendment as well. I really think council should be taking a much more proactive role than it has in the past. And I think if we keep doing what we've always done, we're going to keep doing, and we're going to keep getting what we've always got. And at the moment, that's not okay. We need to do something different. We need to do something more proactive. And here's an option that's worth pursuing.
Thank you. Councillor Cameron, is a question.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the most appropriate member of staff. Can any members of staff tell me if it is a fact that Central Coast Council is currently bankrupt and has been suspended?
Mr. Zachnich, I think you're the right man for that job.
Thanks for the question through you, Mr. Mayor. Central Coast Council is under administration. That is a fact.
Thank you. Speaker 4, Councillor Thurley.
I could preface it with a question to Mr. Zachnich. What about Griffith? How are they doing with community housing?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think that's one of the examples we cited in the report from memory.
Thank you. I support this motion. Basically, C says further investigate. It doesn't say invest lots of money in building houses. It says investigate partnering. What that partnership would look like, how it would work, is something that we're asking the staff to look at. Griffith is one of the councils that's working in this space. I don't believe that we should certainly bear the costs of doing this, but we do have a responsibility to the people who live here. And we have done a number of developments in this city which have built affordable housing. I could point out a few of them. It's something that we need to do. And it's not, I'm not suggesting we throw millions of dollars at this. I'm suggesting we look at what the options are and compare what's being done by other councils and other parties around the state. And I think it's a very sensible thing to do.
Thank you. There appears to be no further speakers. Councillor Stutchbury, do you wish to close debate?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I thank Councillor Cameron for his impassioned objection to who could potentially be paying for this. The problem with waiting for the New South Wales state government to build this housing is that we'll be waiting a very long time, and the homeless people don't have that amount of time to wait. As a council, we have invested in some developments. I'm pretty sure we invested heavily in Nexus. I think we invested pretty heavily in one of those airport industrial things. This council has a history of investing in land-based developments, and I don't see why we couldn't invest in some community housing, and potentially, you know, some of these people could even be paying rent, and there might be some income to be generated from it. I don't know. It's not meant to be an income generating idea. It's meant to be some way of housing people in desperate need. Thank you.
Thank you. Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you. 13.9, submission to OLG risk management internal audit for local council and joint organisation New South Wales. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move that council endorses the 2021 submission to the New South Wales Office of Local Government draft guidelines for risk management and internal audit framework for local councils in New South Wales 2021 framework.
Thank you. Councillor Glycan.
I'm very happy to second that.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, just to speak to that.
Briefly, it's a fairly Technical matter, OLG had suggested a number of changes to the way the Audit Risk and Improvement Committees would work, one of which that they would only have one councillor and that council would not have a vote. There were a number of other issues and council wrote a very strong submission opposing the proposed changes by OLG.
Thank you. Any further speakers for or against? No. Okay, thanks. Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. 14.1, the Albury City 2021 annual report. Councillor Vanderman.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor, through you to move the recommendation as a motion. The council receives and notes Albury City's 2020-2021 annual report that is to be submitted to the Minister for Local Government by the 30th of November 2021.
Thank you. Councillor Doxey.
Happy to second, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Vanderman, do you wish to speak to that?
Just briefly, Mr. Mayor, but I think you've covered quite a few of your sentiments in the Merrill Minute that was discussed earlier in terms of the work that the staff and the councillors have done in navigating through the last 12 months in terms of what we've tried to do for our community. And I think the annual report's a reflection of those achievements and highlights. And I commend the motion to the rest of council. Thank you.
Thank you. No further speakers for or against. Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. 14.2, the Albury City end of term report 2016 to 2021. Who wants to go at this one? No one. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move the council receives and notes the Albury City end of term report 2016 to 2021.
Thank you. Councillor Cameron.
Second that, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, just to speak to that.
No, I think it speaks for itself. It's a very comprehensive outline of what's been occurring in those 5 years.
Thank you. And as in school, you all get your report card very soon. Some of you, not some of us. Okay, happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Some of us are dropouts. Those against? No, we got expelled. The motion is carried. Thank you. Operation 14.3, operational plan, quarterly progress report. Thank you. Councillor Vanderman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, I move the recommendation of motion that the council receives and notes the operational plan progress report September 2021.
Thank you. Councillor Doxey.
Happy to second, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Vanderman, did you wish to speak to that?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
There's no questions or debate. Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. The Albury City Corporate Success Pillars quarterly update. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Vanderman, your light's on.
Oh, is it? Okay, I'll move the recommendation motion the council receives and notes the Albury City Corporate Success Pillars quarterly update, September 2021.
Thank you. Councillor Glackin.
Happy to second that.
Thank you. Councillor Vanderman, do you wish to speak to that?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
There appears to be no question or debate. Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you. Albury City investment balances for the month of October 2021. Thank you, Councillor Glackin.
Thank you. Through you to move the recommendation as a motion that council receives notes the investment balances report for the month of October 2021.
Thank you. Councillor Doxey.
Happy to second, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Did you wish to speak to that, Councillor Glackin?
Simply to highlight the ongoing decrease in the AMP investments over time as they mature. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Annual Code of Conduct Statistics report to OLG. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Cameron.
I'd like to move the motion.
Yep.
That council receive and note the reports on statistics, code of conduct complaints about councillors and the chief and executive officer.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Stutchbury.
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Cameron, do you have a question before you open debate?
I do, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Through you to the most appropriate member of staff. Can staff advise how much has been the total cost of code of conducts in the last 12 months?
Mr. Zachnich, are you able to answer that question?
Thank you for the question through Mr. Mayor. As detailed in the summary report, it's over $33,000.
Another question?
Yes, is that what would that be on average, or are some much more expensive than others?
Mr. Zachnich?
It varies depending on the matter that's investigated or if it proceeds to investigation.
All right. Well, I'm ready to give another elucidating sermon.
Thank you. Councillor Vandervan, did you have a question?
I'm not, yeah, I did. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Just before we open debate?
Yeah, to the most relevant member of staff, which probably will be Mr. Zachnich. I have concerns about the timeframes that it takes to conduct some of these code of conduct assessments, if you like. What do we have in place to make sure that we do these code of conduct reviews in a timely manner?
Mr. Zachnich?
Thanks for the question through you, Mr. Mayor. So the initial reviews are done internally, so we endeavour to turn those around fairly quickly. If there are issues or matters that need further review, external review or investigation, then we have a panel of conduct reviewers or preliminary conduct reviewers that we utilise. And obviously, time frame and responsiveness is a key factor for re-engagement or sharing the work around the panel. So it's something we're very mindful of, and some obviously have taken longer than others.
Yeah, is there any, so we've got a panel at the moment, so follow up, Mr. Mayor, through you. So we've got a panel at the moment. Is there anybody, I'm not sure who determines that panel, but do we take note of the length of time that it takes to determine some of these? Because I think the saying is justice delayed is justice denied. And I personally would like to see these matters dealt with on a very timely basis.
Mr. Zachnich?
Yeah, thanks for the questions. Yeah, Council endorses the panel.
Okay.
Following a tender process that we participate in through the Ramjo Council. So the panels are shared across the region or available to the region. And certainly there are, while there are some performance indicators, I suppose you'd call them, the process is very much determined by the OLG administrative procedures for the code of conduct. So there is a step process that must be gone through, which obviously takes time and resources.
Just one final question, Mr. Mayor, through you. Is it the normal process then for the new council to determine that code of conduct review panel? Or what's the process?
So the current terms are a 3-year term, I believe, for the current panel, but we'll be reviewing all those arrangements with the new council.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cameron, you're opening debate.
Oh, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Someone once said, and I can never remember who it was, that patriotism is the last refuge of the scoundrel. Well, in terms of local government, in my personal and political opinion, code of conducts are the last refuge of the scoundrel. They are a system which has persisted since the 91 Act and probably earlier, I can't be sure, came in, and they're totally dysfunctional. They just don't give satisfaction to anybody, whether it's a member of the public or whether it's a councillor, and not just in Albury, but right around the state. You can see how ineffectual they are. I think the average ratepayer of Albury would be surprised to learn that there is such a thing as a code of conduct. I think most of them are blissfully unaware that there's this so-called supposed to be regulatory mechanism to control councillors' behaviour. The reality is that it doesn't. It becomes a tit for tat exercise ever so often, that you see people lodge them and then they lodge them back. Not everybody, of course, but there are some people who behave that way in local government. It becomes a mechanism where someone can't or isn't robust enough or can't articulate well enough their beliefs or isn't confident enough in their core beliefs to advocate for those beliefs in sometimes adverse conditions, that they then sook basically and start throwing codes of conduct around. And you see that in many councils around Sydney, Newcastle, Wollongong, Dubbo, and even Albury on occasion. It's a bad system. The better system would be, which is also exists a possibility in parallel, for the Office of Local Government to carry out these sorts of investigations where a councillor's conduct is complained about. And the particular latitude that exists in the very cumbersome process and the secrecy that surrounds them also means that they're able to go off in tangents, and no two, it seems to me, are ever the same. And no objective standard, it seems to me, is applied from one to the next, because they all seem to slide and twist around in a serpentine fashion because of the amount of discretion that is given to those that deal with them at various levels. I've never moved a code of conduct. I never would. I have utter contempt for codes of conduct and the process around them. And I'm happy to say, to my knowledge, I've never had one substantiated against me, but you can never be fully sure, Mr. Mayor. You can never be fully sure, because the situation is that, and the process is that opaque and stupid, that it's possible to have findings of some sort of wrongdoing alleged against you, and it's never clearly articulated to you. And I've had investigators refuse to specify whether it was substantiated or not. It's just a very, very strange process. It needs to be done away with, something that the state government should do away with. I hope an incoming Labor government will do away with it. And investigations like this should be carried out, and it can be carried out even now by the Office of Local Government. So they're expensive, they're stupid. I say to incoming councillors, don't get involved with them. You just waste the ratepayers' money and you look like a dill. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cameron. Any further questions or debate? Or no? I'm happy to put the motion. All those in favour? The motion is carried. Thank you. Albury Economic Indicators 2021. Thank you. Councillor Vanderman.
Mr. Mayor, happy to move the recommendation of the motion. The council receives and notes the Albury Economic Indicators Report 2021.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley.
I'll second the motion, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Vanderman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll reserve right of reply.
There appears to be no further speaking or debate, so I'm happy to give you the right of reply.
No, I don't need it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. 2021-22 Development Statistics, September quarter. Thank you. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move that council receives and notes the information in the September quarterly development stats report for 2021-2022.
Thank you. Councillor Glackham.
Happy to second.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, just to speak to that at all?
Simply to commend the staff. It shows that we really reached our targets and did very well.
Thank you. Question from Councillor Stutchbury.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you to the relevant member of staff. I don't know how long it's been going on for now, but there's this thing called the New South Wales Planning Portal. I'm just wondering if that has had any impact, positive or negative, on the amount of time it's taken for staff to deal with DAs since that portal's been in place.
Mr. Christie.
Thanks for the question and for you, Mr. Mayor. I'd say a bit of both. Obviously, there's any teething problems with any new system that comes into place, but there's also obviously some impacts with the sheer amount of development activities going in Albury, as well as access to resources and staff to be able to deal with it. But implementing any new system does have its impacts from that, so there has been some impact upon it, but most of the impact is on getting the applications into the system, not so much in actually the assessment by the staff once they're in.
Happy with that? Thank you. Mr. Christie, I see that there's significant uplift in the budget for the 12 months, but also a nearly $500,000 increase in terms of development contributions. Is that the prevailing pattern with the current spike in our new homes and building?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Mr. Mayor. Yes, it does appear to be continuing so, and the stats for the first quarter of this year show DAs, for example, at $54.5 million in value, whereas they were at $41 million at a similar quarters in the previous 2 years. So there is still that continued value of overall development within the council area.
Thank you. Councillor Glackham, you wish to speak for?
Just to highlight really that this is one of the very few positives from COVID, that people are spending money in our region, largely on their own homes, but in effect, because people haven't been able to go away, there's certain other things people haven't been able to do. So it's had a positive effect within our regional community and particularly here in Albury. So yeah, one of the few good things to come from COVID for us as a city.
Okay, thank you. Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. There are no delegates reports for noting. Notice of urgent business, councillors. Anyone have any for the very last meeting? Oh, Councillor Cameron.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to ask a question through you to the General Manager about what council can do to stop illegal activity in the form of election campaign material being attached to council buildings.
Mr. Zachnich.
Thanks for the question through you, Mr. Mayor. So there are provisions under the Electoral Act in terms of placement of posters and election material within proximity to polling places. And in addition, more specifically, to answer your question, under the Local Government Act in terms of placement of electoral material posters on council premises. So conversations both with the Albury electoral officer, responsible officer for the election, as well as our ranger team to keep an eye on those from day one of the pre-poll starting today.
Supplementary, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I've done some research on this afternoon, and it appears that councils in Sydney, for example, several of them, are fining people who illegally put their campaign material on council property, whether it be council buildings or whether it be traffic regulatory posts and signs. What capacity under the Local Government Act do we have, or do council staff have, I should say, to fine people who repeatedly engage in this sort of behaviour, as we saw this afternoon with 2 goes of it by one particular group?
Thanks for the question through, Mr. Mayor. So that's an option for our council officers. Obviously, from an education perspective, we'd issue warnings, ask for material to be removed. If that's not complied with, then fines and removal of material and fines are the next step.
Just one final thing.
Yeah.
As CEO, Mr. Zachnich, how many times do you think someone should be warned, or a political party should be warned not to engage in illegal activity before regulatory action is taken? Do you have a rule of thumb for the staff, or what's your philosophy on that?
Mr. Zachnich.
Well, the approach we're taking with this election is the first warning. If that's not complied with, the material will be removed and a fine issued to the relevant individual and or organisation.
Thank you.
Okay, so no further urgent business. Thank you, councillors. There are no confidential matters, and that finalises our last meeting for the 3-year term. And I could think in 3 words, I can sum up everything I've learned about council. It goes on. So thanks, everyone. Thanks for your time, and thanks for the evening. Thanks to the staff.
It's very profound.
Yeah. You said you couldn't remember who the New South Wales Liberal Premier was.
That's right.
I can't remember who the New South Wales State Opposition Leader is.
Chris Menza.
Chris,
Probably so. INS.